You might think you are perfectly safe when you lock your bedroom door tonight, but if you wake up completely frozen, you'll realize locks don't stop what's already inside. If you have never experienced sleep paralysis, consider yourself lucky. Medical textbooks will tell you it's a simple misfire of the brain. They say your body is essentially flooded with a chemical that paralyzes your muscles while you sleep, so you don't act out your dreams. And sometimes you wake up before the chemical wears off. They explain it away as a glitch, a biological error. But anyone who has actually been trapped in their own body knows. The doctors are wrong. It isn't a glitch, it is a doorway. I have it often. So often, in fact, that I usually know the exact second it begins. It always starts with the wait. You are lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and suddenly the air in the room feels thick, like the gravity has been turned up. Then the paralysis sets in. It creeps up your legs, locking your joints, freezing your spine until the only thing you can move are your eyes. The worst part isn't the immobility. The worst part is the feeling of absolute, crushing helplessness. When your brain realizes you are trapped, instinct takes over. You try to thrash, you try to kick, you try to open your mouth to scream for help, but your vocal cords are dead. Nothing works. You are a prisoner behind your own ribs. Over the years, I had to learn how to cope. I had to develop rules to survive the nights. The most important rule was simple. Keep your eyes closed. Do not open them, no matter what. You see, even with your eyes shut, the doorway is open. You still hear things. Sometimes the room fills with the sound of muffled voices, whispering urgently from the corners of the ceiling, speaking in a language you can't quite understand. Sometimes you feel the physical sensation of cold hands gripping your ankles. I have laid awake, eyes squeezed shut, feeling the distinct, terrifying sensation of being dragged inch by inch toward the edge of the mattress. But as long as I kept my eyes closed, I could pretend it was just a dream. I could wait it out. But one night, the rule wasn't enough. I woke up at exactly 3:14 a.m. I knew the time because the red glow of my digital clock was bleeding through my eyelids. Immediately, I felt the heavy, suffocating pressure on my chest. The paralysis had set in. Keep your eyes closed, I told myself. Just wait it out. But then, I heard the door. My bedroom door's always locked. I am obsessive about it. But in the dead silence of the house, I heard a slow, deliberate scraping. Scratch. Scratch. It's scratch. Down near the bottom of the wood, like fingernails trying to find purchase on the frame. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I tried to swallow, but my throat was bone dry. Then came the heavy thud against the wood. Something was trying to get in. I lay there, frozen, listening as the doorknob began to rattle violently. Whatever was on the other side was furious. I tried to scream. I put every ounce of willpower into my vocal cords, begging for a sound, a yell, a whisper. Nothing came out. And then the rattling stopped. The scratching stopped. The house fell dead silent. I thought it was over. I thought the hallucination had passed, but the temperature in the room had plummeted. The air felt like ice against my face. And there was a new sensation, the unmistakable feeling of being watched, against my better judgment, against the one rule that had kept me sane. I opened my eyes. The room was bathed in the dim gray light of the moon bleeding through the blinds. Everything looked perfectly normal. My dresser, my closet, the locked door. But then, my eyes slowly tracked to the far corner of the room, the darkest corner. Standing there, perfectly still, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. She was wearing a faded, tattered nightgown that hung loosely off her frail frame. Her head was tilted downward, her long, dark hair obscuring her face. She was just standing there, facing me. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded my veins. This wasn't a shadow. This wasn't a trick of the light. She had mass. She had presence. I could see the fabric of her gown shifting slightly, as if caught in a draft that wasn't there. I tried to squeeze my eyes shut again, but my eyelids wouldn't obey. I was forced to stare at her. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. Then, she slowly raised her head. Through the tangle of her dark hair, I saw her eyes. They weren't human. They were wide, entirely black, devoid of any white, reflecting the red glow of the digital clock. She stared right through me, a stare of pure, unadulterated malice. Then, the silence broke. Without any warning, she let out a shriek. It wasn't a sound a child could make. It was a deafening, metallic screech that vibrated in my teeth. It sounded like tearing metal and human agony mixed into one. Before my brain could even process the sound, she moved. She didn't walk, she didn't run, she blurred. In a fraction of a second, she crossed the room and vaulted onto my bed. The mattress violently sunk under her weight. I felt her knees slam into my ribs, pinning me down. The smell of rotting earth and copper filled my nose. She leaned in close, her black eyes inches from my face, still emitting that impossible ear-piercing shriek. And then, her hands shot forward. Her fingers were freezing, like ice-cold iron rods wrapping tightly around my throat. She began to squeeze. The pressure was immense. I could feel my windpipe crushing under her grip. My lungs screamed for oxygen. I tried to buck my hips. I tried to raise my hands to claw at her face, but my body was dead weight. I was completely, utterly powerless. The edges of my vision started to turn black. The red numbers of the clock blurred. I could feel the life being squeezed out of me, trapped inside a meat suit that refused to fight back. The last thing I saw before the darkness took over completely was her mouth curling into a smile. I snapped violently upward, gasping for air. My hands immediately flew to my throat, clawing at my own skin. I was sitting up in bed, sweating through my sheets. The room was empty, the door was locked. The corner was just a corner. I sat there for hours, the digital clock ticking away, my chest heaving, waiting for the sun to come up. My throat throbbed. When I finally got out of bed and walked to the bathroom mirror, I didn't see any bruises. There were no handprints on my neck. But I know what I felt. People ask me why horror movies don't scare me anymore. It's because a monster on a screen can be turned off. You can walk away. But when the monster is waiting for you behind your own closed eyes, there is nowhere to run. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night, unable to move, feeling like someone is watching you from the dark corner of your room, whatever you do, don't open your eyes. Sleeping facing the wall usually feels like the safest position, until you hear the mattress sink behind you and realize in absolute horror that the physical creature has crawled into bed with you. There's a strange comfort in science. When something terrifying happens to us, our first instinct is to run to a textbook or to a doctor, begging for a rational explanation. We want to be told that the monster in the dark is just a glitch, a biological misfire. And for sleep paralysis, science has a very neat, very clean answer. They tell us it is simply a chemical disconnect. Your brain wakes up, but your body is still flooded with the hormones that keep your muscles paralyzed during REM sleep. The hallucinations? Just a byproduct of a panicked mind trapped in a dreaming state. It is a very comforting lie. Because if it is just a random misfire of an individual brain, then why do so many of us see the exact same things? Why do people across oceans, across different cultures, and across entirely different generations describe the exact same entities. We don't just see random shapes, we see them, and we all instinctively know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they are purely evil. My cycle started when I was young, and they have only grown more vivid, more physical, as the years have dragged on. I don't just see things anymore, I hear them. And worse, I feel them. Over the course of my life, I've been visited by two distinct entities. They never come together, they take turns, like they're sharing a territory. The first one is the Watcher. He is a massive, towering figure. If he stood up straight, his head would brush the ceiling of my bedroom. But he is always hunched, draped in a heavy, tattered, dark cloak that seems to absorb the dim light around him. Usually, when the paralysis sets in and the heavy weight crushes my chest, I can open my eyes just enough to see him standing at the very foot of my bed. He never moves, he never speaks. The hood is pulled so low that where a face should be, there's only an impenetrable, empty black void. But you can feel him looking at you. The malice radiating off of him is so heavy, it makes the air in the room taste stale. It feels like standing next to a massive, wild predator that is just deciding whether or not you are worth killing. For years, I learned to endure him. He would stand at the foot of the bed, I would lay frozen, and eventually, the paralysis would break. Until the night he changed the rules. I woke up at some ungodly hour of the night. Instantly, I felt the familiar, terrifying rigidity in my limbs. My spine was locked. My jaw was clamped shut. My eyes darted to the foot of the bed. Nothing, just the empty space of my bedroom. For a split second, a wave of relief washed over me. I thought it was just a physical episode, no hallucinations. But then, the temperature in the room plummeted. The hair on my arms stood straight up against the sheets. The air grew so thick and heavy that I couldn't pull it into my lungs. I couldn't turn my head. But out of the very corner of my peripheral vision, a massive black shape blotted out the light from the window. He wasn't at the foot of the bed. He was standing right next to me, towering over my mattress, so close that if I could have lifted my arm, my knuckles would have brushed the coarse, decaying fabric of his cloak. The void beneath his hood was angled directly down at my face. The sheer, concentrated evil pouring out of that empty space was suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to scream, I tried to close my eyes, but my body refused to obey. He just stood there, inches away, letting me drown in the terror of his presence, reminding me that I was completely, utterly powerless. When the paralysis finally broke, I shot up, violently gasping for air. The room was empty. I told myself it was just a nightmare, just a chemical glitch. But the Watcher, as terrifying as he is the lesser of the two evils, because the Watcher only observes. The second entity is physical. If the hooded figure is silent and imposing, this other thing is frantic, repulsive, and vile. It is small, maybe the size of a large dog, but shaped like a twisted mockery of a human. Its skin is a sickening, mottled browny green. Its limbs are spindly and bent at all the wrong angles. And its face, it has these sharp, exaggerated, pointy features, like a gargoyle that has been stripped of its stone and given rotting, damp flesh. Years later, I saw a famous historical painting of a sleep paralysis demon, an incubus sitting on a sleeping woman's chest. The creature in that painting was exactly what visits me, but I'd been seeing him long before I ever knew that painting existed. He usually comes when I am trapped lying flat on my back. It always starts with the weight, not a general pressure in the air, but a distinct physical mass dropping directly onto my sternum. It knocks the wind completely out of my lungs. When I open my eyes, he is sitting on my chest, his sharp knees digging into my ribs. He leans down so close I can smell the stagnant, swampy odor coming off his skin. And then he starts to speak. It isn't a human language. It's a rapid, wet, clicking whisper, guttural sounds that vibrate right through my skull. He restricts my breathing, pressing down harder and harder, whispering that awful language right into my face while I suffocate. But the most terrifying encounter I ever had with him didn't happen while I was on my back. It was the dead of winter. I woke up paralyzed, but this time, I was lying on my side. I was facing the blank wall. My back was completely exposed to the open room. I couldn't move. I couldn't see the door. I couldn't see the rest of the bed. I just stared at the drywall, waiting. Then I heard it. The mattress shifted behind me. The distinct sound of something small and heavy crawling up the sheets. My blood ran cold. The paralysis kept me frozen in place, staring at the wall as I felt the mattress dip inch by inch, getting closer to my back. Then the whispering started. Right behind my head, that same frantic, ancient clicking language. It was so close I could feel the unnatural chill of its breath hitting the back of my neck. I tried to thrash. I tried to throw my elbow backward. My muscles strained so hard they burned, but I remained perfectly still. The whispering grew louder, more excited. And then I felt it. Something wet, something thin and muscular and cold. A tongue. It slipped into my ear. It was long, like a snake's, sliding deep into the canal. I heard the slithery, wet noise of it moving inside my head. The physical sensation of cold saliva against my eardrum. The absolute, primal disgust that ripped through my mind is something I will never be able to fully articulate. It was a violation so profound that it felt like my sanity was going to snap in half. I lay there, completely paralyzed, a prisoner in my own bed, forced to listen and feel as this ancient, vile thing whispered its language into my mind. When I finally woke up, when my body finally jolted violently to life, I rolled off the bed and collapsed onto the floor. I scrubbed at my ear until it bled, trying to get the phantom feeling of that cold, slithering muscle out of my head. I can't tell you how desperately I cling to the scientific explanation. I read the articles. I recite the medical terms. REM atonia, hypnagogic hallucinations. I tell myself over and over again that I am not actually being haunted, that it is just chemistry, because the alternative is something I choose not to think about too much. If it is just a glitch in my brain, how did the painter from centuries ago know exactly what the gremlin looked like? Why do we all see the exact same hooded figure watching us from the foot of the bed? Science gives us an excuse so we can eventually go back to sleep. But deep down, in the darkest hours of the night, we all know. They are real, and they are waiting for us to close our eyes. There is a universal feeling of relief that we all understand. It's that exact moment when you jolt awake from a terrible nightmare. Your heart is pounding, you are covered in a cold sweat, but as your eyes adjust to the dark of your bedroom, you realize you are safe. You are awake. The monster wasn't real. But what happens when waking up is actually the trap. If you suffer from sleep paralysis, you already know the standard horrors, the crushing weight on your chest, the inability to scream, the shadowy figures standing at the foot of your bed, watching you in the dark. I have experienced all of those, but the most terrifying thing my mind ever put me through wasn't a shadow demon. It was the realization that my own brain was holding me hostage, It started like any other episode. I woke up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, completely frozen. My arms were pinned to my sides, my jaw was locked shut. The air in the bedroom felt thick and suffocating. I went through my usual mental routine. Don't panic. Don't open your eyes too wide. Just breathe and wait for the chemical to wear off. Usually it takes a few minutes. You fight, you strain your muscles, and eventually a finger twitches, then a toe, and then the paralysis shatters all at once and you gasp for air. That night, it happened just like that. My body jolted. The invisible weight lifted off my chest. I took a massive, shuddering breath and sat up in bed. I swung my legs over the side of the mattress. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet. I rubbed my face, completely exhausted, and decided to go to the bathroom to splash some cold water on my eyes. I stood up and walked out of my bedroom, but as I stepped into the hallway, something felt wrong. It was too quiet. Even in the dead of night, a house makes noise. The refrigerator hums, the pipes settle, the wind brushes against the windows. But the hallway was dead silent. A vacuum, and the air felt heavy, like walking through deep water. Every step took just a fraction more effort than it should have. Still, I pushed forward. I walked into the bathroom and flicked the light switch. The fluorescent bulb flickered to life, casting a harsh, pale glow over the white tiles. I walked over to the sink, turned the handle, and cupped the icy water in my hands. I splashed it over my face, letting the freezing temperature shock my system back to reality. I grabbed a towel, dried my eyes, and took a deep breath. Then, I looked up into the mirror. I stared at my reflection, my tired eyes, my wet hair. But then, I blinked. My reflection didn't. My heart completely stopped. I stood frozen at the sink, staring into the glass. The thing in the mirror, wearing my face, was staring back at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I tried to step backward, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed again, standing right there in the bathroom. And then, the reflection slowly, deliberately, curled its lips into a massive, unnatural smile. Instantly, the bathroom vanished. I was slammed violently backward on my mattress. I was lying flat on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling of my bedroom. My arms were pinned to my sides. My jaw was locked shut. The crushing weight was back on my chest. I hadn't woken up. I hadn't gone to the bathroom. I was still asleep. I was caught in a false awakening loop. Panic, true, primal panic set in. My brain was simulating reality perfectly just to torture me. I fought the paralysis with everything I had. I strained my neck. I tried to scream, begging for my body to wake up. After what felt like hours, the invisible weight finally broke. I gasped for air, sitting up violently in bed. I was sweating, terrified. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My bare feet hit the cold hardwood floor. I stood up. I walked to the door. But as I stepped into the hallway, the air felt heavy. The house was perfectly, completely silent. I realized with absolute, crushing horror, I was still in the loop. I was trapped in a labyrinth inside my own mind, and every time I thought I had escaped to the safety of the waking world, the trapdoor would open beneath my feet, and I would be slammed back into my paralyzed body. It took 5 cycles. 5 times I woke up. 5 times I walked through that silent house, only to be thrown back to the mattress. When I finally, truly woke up to the morning sun bleeding through my blinds, I didn't get out of bed for an hour. I just laid there, terrified that if I stood up, the world would dissolve again. For 18 months, sleep paralysis was my own personal hell. I learned to anticipate the shadow figures standing by the door. I learned to endure the false awakening loops. I learned to brace myself for the sheer, suffocating terror of my own bedroom. I was so used to seeing demons that I never expected to be visited by anything else. It happened on a Tuesday night. I woke up and immediately felt the familiar rigidity in my limbs. I couldn't move. My head was slightly turned on the pillow, facing the empty space beside my bed. I felt the presence immediately. Usually, when an entity enters the room, the air turns to ice. You feel a heavy, predatory malice that makes your stomach churn. You know, instantly, that whatever is in the dark with you wants to do you harm. But this time, there was no cold. There was no suffocating dread. Instead, the room felt warm. It felt peaceful. I strained my paralyzed eyes, expecting to see a towering shadow or a decaying monster crouching in the corner. But as my eyes adjusted to the moonlight filtering through the blinds, I saw him. He wasn't a shadow. He was perfectly solid, perfectly human. Kneeling quietly on the floor, right next to my mattress, was a man. He was dressed impeccably. He wore a tailored 1950s-style suit, thick tweed perfectly pressed with a matching fedora resting gently on his head. The moonlight caught the dust motes drifting in the air around him. He wasn't looming over me. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was just kneeling there, watching me. I was completely paralyzed, entirely vulnerable. But for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't terrified. He had this soft, reassuring smile on his face. It wasn't the manic, unnatural grin of the mirror reflection. It was a kind smile. It was the exact look a parent gives their child when they crack the bedroom door open just to check on them in the middle of the night. A look that says, "You are safe. I am watching over you." He didn't speak a single word. He didn't have to. The feeling rolling off of him was so powerful, so profoundly calming, that the tension in my frozen muscles actually began to melt. But the strangest part of the entire experience wasn't the suit, and it wasn't the fact that he was benevolent. The strangest part was that I knew him. I couldn't place his name. I couldn't pinpoint the exact memory. But as I stared at his face, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of familiarity. It felt exactly like running into a relative you hadn't seen since you were a toddler, someone who held you when you were too young to form permanent memories, but whose presence was permanently stamped into your soul. He stayed kneeling there, smiling warmly, holding space for me in the dark. And for the first time since my sleep paralysis began, I didn't try to force myself awake. I didn't thrash. I didn't panic. I just closed my eyes and let myself fall into a deep, peaceful sleep. When you look up sleep paralysis online, you find thousands of terrifying stories. The internet is flooded with accounts of the old hag, the Hat Man, the shadow demons, and the mimics. We talk endlessly about the monsters that haunt our bedrooms, but I have always wondered, why does no one talk about the protectors? If our brains are capable of manifesting pure, concentrated evil to torture us while we sleep, isn't it possible that they can also manifest our guardians? Or maybe, just maybe, it isn't our brains at all. Maybe the doorway that sleep paralysis opens swings both ways. And while the demons slip through to feed on our fear, sometimes the people who loved us long before we can remember slip through to make sure we are okay. I never saw the man in the 1950s suit again. I don't know if he was an ancestor, a guardian angel, or just a rare mercy from my own subconscious. But if you ever wake up frozen in the dark and you feel a presence beside your bed, don't automatically assume it is there to hurt you. Sometimes the things in the dark are just making sure you can sleep.